TSI-2 evolution and early warning the detecting transition before symptoms part 1, number 1594, the 11th of April 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, category, stroke and cardiovascular disease. Introduction. After reviewing my TSI-2 and TSI-3B charts, I recognized a clear structural difference between these two indices. TSI-2 uses blood pressure BP only, including pulse pressure PP and systolic blood pressure SPP, which represent the mechanical loading applied to the vascular system. This TSI-2 proxy is used as a warning tool for cardiovascular diseases CVD. In contrast, the TSI-3B proxy expands this mechanical perspective by incorporating pulse pressure PP equals SPP TBP, systolic blood pressure SPP, and estimated average glucose EEG, thereby combining peak pressure force SPP, vascular stiffness PP equals SPP TBP, and metabolic structural damage resulting from diabetes glucose into a single multiplicative interaction index for stroke risk. The more smooth curve diagrams in the middle of the attached figure, using 90-day moving averaged data of pulse pressure PP, systolic blood pressure SPP, and glucose EEG, reveals the long-term trend more clearly by removing short-term daily fluctuations that are present in the daily data curves shown in the top diagram of the attached figure. This smoothing process is important because physiological systems are dynamic and contain noise arising from daily biomarker measurement variation and daily lifestyle changes, including food, exercise, hydration, emotional stress, sleep variability, and environmental disturbances. By observing the smooth trajectory through a 90-day moving average curve rather than relying only on daily value curves, the true direction of the biomedical system becomes not only visible but much clearer. From the top to curve diagrams, starting from the 2nd of August 2025, about 1 month after my stroke on June 21, 2025, I began measuring my blood pressure about 20 times daily. Some clinicians told me that I was being overly obsessive, since they had never seen a patient measure blood pressure so diligently and intensively. However, I have my reasons for doing this. Most stroke patients have a long history of hypertension, chronic hypertension, in my case, based on a single daily blood pressure measurement taken each early morning over the past 15 years, together with quarterly measurements obtained during clinician office visits. I almost never observed my systolic blood pressure SPP values exceeding 140 mmHg. This conclusion is supported by my annual data curve covering the past 11.3 years, from the 1st of January 2015 through the 11th of April 2026. Where the highest annual average SPP was 133.68 mmHg. However, around noon on June 21, 2025, I was under a stressful situation related to a real estate transaction issue, which suddenly pushed my SPP up to 175 mmHg. And I suffered a stroke shortly afterward. My usual annual average SPP is approximately then 102 mmHg and 134 mmHg. Therefore, this sudden spike to 175 mmHg represents an increase of about plus 41 to plus 73 mmHg. This magnitude of increase reflects large acute mechanical load applied to already aged and stiffened blood vessels, likely resulting from long-term diabetes-related vascular damage. Background information. I am not an MD or a licensed clinician, but I do understand my own health condition well. Over the past 17 years, I have collected more than 4 million data points covering my primary biomarkers and key lifestyle details. Based on this long-term evidence, I know that I am not a chronic hypertension patient. Instead, a single episode of acute hypertension, reaching 175 mmHg, nearly took my life. This realization explains why, after my stroke, I began measuring my blood pressure approximately 20 times per day in order to detect these sudden and dangerous spikes that could potentially become life-threatening. My hundreds brain CT scan images took at Stanford Hospital already showed many bright white spots, vascular calcification, resulting from my 36-year history of type 2 diabetes, particularly during the first 20 years from 1990 to 2009, when I relied mainly on diabetes medications and did not pay attention to lifestyle management at all. These long-term metabolic damages weakened my vascular structure and increased vascular stiffness, making me highly vulnerable to sudden blood pressure spikes. Therefore, frequent monitoring allows me to detect transient extreme values that would otherwise miss by a single daily measurement or occasional clinic visits. This intensive monitoring approach helps me better understand the dynamic behavior of my vascular system and reduces the probability of another acute event, most importantly, after the 2nd of August 2025. Both my TSI-2 and TSI-3B results remain within the safe range, for example, between 80 and 100, indicating a relatively stable physiological condition with a low probability of another stroke. The trend after this date shows reduced volatility and gradual stabilization of both mechanical vascular loading from blood pressure and metabolic stress contribution from glucose. When I examined June 21, 2025, the day of my hemorrhagic stroke, within th 19-month data window from September 20, 2024 to the 10th of April 2026, 9.5 months before and after my stroke, shown in the attached figure, both TSI-2 and TSI-3B reached peak values around my stroke date. This obvious observation confirms that stroke occurrence is not a random event but the result of accumulated and structural damage interacting with transient mechanical overload. The subsequent 8.5 months from the 2nd of August 2025 to the 11th of April 2026 show a clear post-stroke recovery progression from instability toward stability, reflecting improvements in my lifestyle control, especially emotional stress control, along with metabolic glucose regulation below 119 mg/dl and averaged at 113 mg/dl. Beginning of TSI proxy, I became fully aware of, and convinced about, the early warning capability of the TSI proxy on the 1st of March 2026 after arriving in Honolulu. Inspired by Isaac Newton's law of motion FMXA. Turning the clock backward to the day of my stroke, June 21, 2025. MY retroactively calculated TSI proxy values indeed detected a temporary instability before any obvious symptoms or abnormal clinical laboratory values appeared. This observation reinforced my belief that TSI functions as a transition or early warning detector, rather than a static diagnostic indicator. I have tested this C proxy only on myself, my wife, and my son, without support from large population-based statistical data. Nevertheless, my intention is simply to develop a practical early warning tool for personal use, not a diagnostic instrument for other patients. In addition, as a mathematician and engineer, I personally maintain a relatively low level of trust in purely statistical research methods. Conventional medicine often relies on snapshot measurements, such as single blood pressure readings or isolated glucose values, whereas a dynamic index captures the trajectory of system behavior. Disease development is a continual process, not a single moment in time. Over the past 9 months after my stroke, my TSI values have fluctuated within a very small range because I have maintained both glucose and blood pressure at stable and healthy levels. Despite this small variation, I have found this TSI tool to be extremely useful. It provides immediate feedback regarding my risk level for another stroke, often as frequently as 20 times per day. This continuous feedback allows me to directly observe how lifestyle factors influence my physiological condition. For example, I can promptly adjust my diet content and portion size, increase post-meal walking, or perform breathing exercises, such as a 4-second inhale followed by an 8-second exhale, repeated for 2 to 5 times. With this real-time TSI risk information and my immediate, detailed lifestyle adjustments, I do not need to wait for quarterly laboratory test results before making necessary lifestyle corrections. This is an important discovery. TSI functions not only as a mathematical index but also as a daily behavioral guidance tool. It helps me maintain discipline in diet, exercise, sleep, and emotional stress control. After making these immediate lifestyle adjustments, I can observe my TSI values dropping almost immediately. This real-time visibility of stroke risk warning encourages consistent healthy behavior and reinforces long-term stability of my biomedical system. This represents an engineering model of a feedback and self-correction cycle. This is the fundamental concept one learned during 12 years of postgraduate training across 5 engineering disciplines at 4 university campuses in the United States. Evolution of TSI concept and its similarity to Newton's F equals m*** from a math physics perspective. The TSI formulation reflects multiplicative interaction among independent but related stressors. Isaac Newton's fundamental insight in classical mechanics about 400 years ago was the multiplicative relationship expressed as F equals mxa, demonstrating that interaction between 2 influential variables produces nonlinear system behavior. If Newton had defined his law of motion as F equals m plus 8 would violate fundamental physical meaning. For example, if the relationship were written as F equals m plus 8, then if m equals 0. The equation becomes F equals if A equals 0. The equation becomes F equals m. This implies that force would still exist even when either mass or acceleration equals zero, which do not represent a meaningful physical relationship in real physics. If either mass or acceleration equals zero, force must also equal zero. Therefore, the correct relationship must be multiplicative, F equals mxa, not additive. In contrast, multiplication reflects dependency and amplified interaction among variables. However, since the age of 6 in elementary school, none of my teachers ever explained that multiplication can produce an amplification effect through interactions among multiple variables. It should be noted that this amplification effect primarily exists in the domain of positive numbers greater than 1, not in the domain of decimals less than 1 or negative numbers. This is part 1.